I never thought I would be the kind of woman who betrays her husband. I used to pride myself on being loyal, committed, the kind of wife that other women looked up to. But the truth is, life has a way of breaking even the strongest convictions. And it all started with Tyler. Tyler had been in our lives for years. He was my husband Mark's best friend since college. He was always around, part of our family in every way except blood. Holidays, birthdays, game nights, he was there, and I never saw him as anything more than a friend. Until one day I did. I can't even pinpoint when the shift happened. Maybe it was the way he looked at me that one evening, when Mark wasn't home, and we were sitting on the back porch, sipping wine and talking about life. Maybe it was the way his hand brushed against mine when he passed me a plate at dinner. Or maybe it was the fact that my marriage, once so full of passion and excitement, had started to feel more like an obligation than a love story. Mark was a good man, but he was also predictable. Safe, the kind of husband who would always be there but never quite saw me the way I wanted to be seen, the way Tyler did. The first real moment of weakness came on a late Friday night. Mark had passed out on the couch after too many drinks, and Tyler and I were left cleaning up the mess from our small gathering. It should have been routine, just another evening spent with friends, but something about the way he lingered in the kitchen with me felt different. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I glanced at Mark, snoring on the couch, then back at Tyler. "Yeah, just tired." He leaned against the counter, watching me. "You don't seem like yourself lately." I let out a dry laugh. "I guess life does that to you." He didn't push, but the way he looked at me, like he actually saw me, made something inside me stir. A feeling I hadn't had in years. We stood there in silence for a moment, the air between us charged with something unspoken. And then, as if testing a boundary neither of us had acknowledged before, he reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers barely grazed my skin, but the touch sent a shiver down my spine. I should have pulled away. I should have laughed it off, made some excuse, walked out of the kitchen. But I didn't. Instead, I held my breath and let the moment stretch just a little longer than it should have. That night, as I lay in bed next to Mark, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about Tyler's hand in my hair. About the way he had looked at me, like he was seeing a side of me even I had forgot. I told myself it was nothing, just a moment, a fleeting mistake. But deep down, I knew better. This was the beginning of something dangerous. And I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. After that night, everything changed. It wasn't immediate. Tyler and I didn't fall into each other's arms the next day, and there was no grand declaration of feelings. But something between us had shifted. The air felt charged whenever we were in the same room. Conversations that used to feel casual now carried an undertone of something deeper, something unspoken, and I found myself looking for excuses to be around him. At first it was harmless, or at least that's what I told myself. If Mark invited Tyler over for a game night, I'd linger in the kitchen a little longer than necessary, hoping he'd come in for a drink. If we were at a party, I'd find him in the crowd, catching his eye across the room before quickly looking away. And every time he returned that look, every time I felt his gaze linger on me just a second too long, my heart would race in a way I hadn't felt in years. I was playing with fire, and I knew it. The moment we crossed the line happened 2 weeks later. Mark had planned a weekend fishing trip with some coworkers, leaving me alone in the house. It wasn't unusual for Tyler to drop by when Mark was out of town. He had done it plenty of times before, whether to check in or just to keep me company. This time, though, it felt different. It was late, and I was curled up on the couch, a glass of wine in my hand, when I heard a knock at the door. My pulse jumped. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Tyler stood there, hands in his pockets, his usual easygoing demeanor feeling strained. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, a poor excuse that we both knew was a lie. I stepped aside, letting him in. "Wine?" I asked, lifting the bottle. He hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Sure." We sat on the couch, the TV playing some show neither of us were watching. The conversation was normal, how Mark was doing, work, life, but there was a tension between us, thick and suffocating. "This is a bad idea," he murmured at one point, staring down at his glass. I should have agreed. I should have laughed it off and sent him home. But instead, I reached out, my fingers brushing against his hand. The moment our skin touched, I felt the last bit of restraint slip away. He looked up, his eyes dark and searching, and then suddenly he was kissing me. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't careful. It was the kind of kiss that comes from months, years of pent-up emotions finally breaking free. My glass slipped from my hand, forgotten as I tangled my fingers in his hair, pulling him closer. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. And I had just made it. I should have felt guilt immediately, but I didn't. Instead, there was a rush of something intoxicating, something that made me feel more alive than I had in years. The heat of his touch, the urgency in the way he pulled me against him, it was unlike anything I had felt in a long time. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless, reality set in like a slow, creeping shadow. Tyler's hands were still on me, his fingers pressing lightly against my waist as if he wasn't ready to let go. "Rachel," he started, his voice husky, uncertain. I shook my head, pressing a finger to his lips. "Don't, not yet." We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of what we'd done sinking in. I knew this was dangerous. I knew I was crossing a line that I could never uncross. And yet, when he reached for me again, I didn't stop him. Because in that moment, all I cared about was how he made me feel. The morning after, I woke up to an empty house and a mind full of contradictions. Mark had sent a text saying they'd be fishing all day, completely unaware of what had happened while he was gone. I stared at my phone for what felt like an eternity, my fingers hovering over the screen as if I could somehow undo what I had done. But I couldn't. Instead, I typed out a message to Tyler. "Me last night." I hesitated, deleting and retyping the words. "We need to talk." Seconds later, my phone vibrated. "Tyler, yeah, I know." I exhaled, setting my phone down, my chest tightening. A part of me had expected regret, shame, maybe even panic. But what I felt most of all was anticipation. When Mark came home that night, everything felt different. I kissed him like I always did, asked about his trip, played the role of the perfect wife. But inside, I felt like I was watching myself from the outside, an actress in a scene I no longer believed in. Tyler had unlocked something in me, something I wasn't ready to bury again. And that terrified me. Days turned into weeks, and my double life truly began. At home, I was the devoted wife. I cooked dinner, laughed at Mark's jokes, listened to his stories. I made love to him, convincing myself that nothing had changed, that I could still be the woman he thought I was. But outside of that house, I was someone else entirely. Tyler and I didn't jump straight into an affair. At first, it was just moments, stolen glances, brief touches, whispers that never should have been spoken. But the tension between us was unbearable. And soon, those moments weren't enough. It started with small excuses to see each other. I'd drop by his place with some ridiculous reason, forgotten keys, needing help with something Mark usually handled. He'd linger a little too long when he helped me carry groceries inside, his fingers grazing mine. Every interaction built upon the last, like we were standing on the edge of something neither of us could control. Then, one afternoon, I found myself at his door again. I wasn't sure what excuse I had used this time, maybe I hadn't even given one. But the second he opened the door and looked at me, I knew we had run out of reasons to pretend. Neither of us spoke as he pulled me inside. Lying in his bed afterward, my skin still warm from his touch, I stared at the ceiling, my mind a war zone of emotions. "You okay?" Tyler asked, his voice softer now, uncertain. I turned to face him, searching his eyes for something, reassurance, validation, an answer to a question I wasn't even sure how to ask. "I don't know." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I don't regret it." Neither did I, and that was the problem. Because now, there was no turning back. If I thought the hardest part was crossing the line, I was wrong. The hardest part was pretending nothing had changed. Each morning, I woke up next to Mark, feeling the weight of what I had done pressing into my chest like a secret I would never escape. I played my role perfectly, kissing him goodbye, making his coffee just the way he liked it, listening to him talk about his day. I smiled at the right moments, laughed when I needed to, but I wasn't really there. Because a part of me belonged to someone else now. Tyler and I couldn't stop. At first, we told ourselves it wouldn't happen again, that we had made a mistake, but that resolve lasted less than a week before we found ourselves alone again, hands tangled, lips desperate, our bodies betraying everything we swore we wouldn't do. It was like an addiction, a secret thrill that made my blood rush every time my phone lit up with his name, every time I found an excuse to see him. We weren't reckless, not yet, but we were tempting fate with every lingering glance, every stolen touch when no one was looking. The problem was, someone was. I didn't notice it at first. I was too caught up in my own world, too wrapped in the intoxicating secrecy of what we were doing. But one evening, as Mark and I sat on the couch watching a movie, he turned to me out of nowhere. "Is everything okay with you?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He studied me for a moment, his brows knitting together. "I don't know, you've just been different lately, distracted." I forced a smile, my heart pounding. "Work has been stressful, just a lot on my mind." He nodded slowly, but his eyes lingered on me longer than usual, like he wasn't sure whether to believe me. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of fear. I had convinced myself I was in control, that I could juggle both lives without consequence. But the truth was, I was playing a dangerous game. And sooner or later, something was going to give. Tyler wasn't worried. When I told him about Mark's suspicions, he only smirked, brushing his fingers along my arm as we sat in his dimly lit living room. "You're overthinking it," he said. "If he really suspected anything, he wouldn't just ask." I wanted to believe him. I needed to, but the unease in my stomach wouldn't go away. "We need to be more careful," I whispered, glancing toward the window as if someone could see us. "This isn't a game, Tyler." He leaned in, his lips brushing against my jaw. "Isn't it?" And maybe that was the problem. Because to him it was fun, exciting, but to me, it was a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode. The tightrope I had been walking on was starting to fray. Every step felt more dangerous, every glance from Mark more scrutinizing. I could feel the shift in his energy, the way his eyes lingered on me a second longer, the hesitation in his voice when he spoke. He hadn't accused me of anything yet, but suspicion had settled between us like a fog, thick and inescapable. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending. It was a Friday night when everything started to unravel. Mark had invited Tyler over for drinks, like he had done 100 times before. Except this time, I felt like I was suffocating. I could barely meet Tyler's gaze as he sat across from me at the dining table, laughing at one of Mark's stories. Every muscle in my body was tense, hyper-aware of the weight of our secret. I forced myself to laugh when necessary, to smile at the right moments, but my mind was racing. Was I being obvious? Could Mark tell? "You okay?" Mark asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the noise of the television in the background. I looked up, realizing too late that I had been staring at my untouched drink. "Yeah, just tired. Long day." He nodded, but his gaze lingered. And then, too casually, he turned to Tyler. "You been busy lately. Haven't seen you around as much." Tyler's fingers tightened around his beer bottle for just a second. "Work, been keeping me busy. You know how it is." "Yeah, funny. Rachel mentioned she ran into you the other day. Didn't realize your work took you near her office." The air in the room changed. Tyler glanced at me for the briefest moment, too brief for Mark to catch, but enough for me to see the warning in his eyes. I forced a laugh. Small world, I guess. Mark didn't smile. He leaned back in his chair, studying both of us like he was fitting puzzle pieces together in his mind. "Yeah," he said slowly, "small world." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way Mark had looked at me, at Tyler. The doubt in his face, the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't the type to make wild accusations, but he was smart. And I knew deep down he wasn't going to let this go. I should have stopped. I should have ended it right then and there, cut off whatever twisted fantasy I had let myself fall into. But instead, the next afternoon, I was at Tyler's apartment, my hands tangled in his shirt, my body pressed against his as if I could escape reality in his arms. "Mark's suspicious," I whispered against his skin. Tyler exhaled sharply, his hands gripping my waist. "Then maybe it's time we figure out what we're doing." I froze, pulling back to look at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, his voice steady, "maybe we stop sneaking around. Maybe we stop pretending this is just a mistake." My heart pounded. "Tyler, He cupped my face, his thumb brushing against my cheek. "Do you love him?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Because the truth, the ugly, terrifying truth, was that I didn't know anymore. That night, I walked into my home knowing something was about to change. Mark was waiting for me in the kitchen, his arms crossed over his chest. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice even but sharp enough to cut through my excuses. I swallowed hard, "Out with some coworkers." "Funny," he said, pulling out his phone. "Because I called Sarah, she said you left work hours ago." The floor beneath me felt like it was crumbling. Mark set his phone down on the counter. "Rachel, don't lie to me." I gripped the edge of the counter, my mind spinning. The web of deceit I had built was starting to collapse around me. I had spent so long convincing myself I could balance both lives, that I could have my cake and eat it too. But I had been wrong. And now, I was about to lose everything. The moment Mark said, "Don't lie to me," I knew it was over. The walls I had built, the carefully woven web of deception, had finally collapsed. There was no hiding now, no talking my way out of this. The truth was right there, hovering between us like a storm cloud ready to break. I swallowed hard, my hands gripping the counter to keep myself steady. "Mark, Where were you?" His voice was calm, but there was something behind it, something dark, something wounded. "Tell me the truth, Rachel, I deserve that much." My throat was dry. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, every part of me screaming to find a way out of this moment. But there was no escape. I had run out of lies. "I was with Tyler," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark didn't move, he didn't blink. The silence stretched between us, suffocating. "And," he pressed. Tears burned behind my eyes. I wanted to soften the truth, to make it hurt less. But there was no way to cushion a blade when it was already buried deep. "I've been seeing him," I confessed, the words tasting like poison on my tongue. "For a while now." Something flickered in Mark's eyes, pain, anger, disbelief. Then he let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Jesus Christ, Rachel." I stepped forward instinctively. "Mark, Don't," he snapped, holding up a hand. "Don't stand there and try to explain. Don't tell me it didn't mean anything." I swallowed hard. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did." His voice finally cracked, and the sheer devastation in it shattered whatever was left of my composure. "You didn't just hurt me, Rachel, you killed us." I don't remember much of what happened after that. Mark walked away from me physically, emotionally. He grabbed his keys, his wallet, and stormed out of the house without another word. I stood there, frozen, as the sound of the door slamming shut echoed through the kitchen. And then I collapsed. I had known this moment was coming. I had played out 100 different versions of it in my head, but none of them had prepared me for how it would feel to actually watch my marriage fall apart in real time. I had spent so much time chasing the thrill of something new, something different, that I had never stopped to think about what it would feel like to lose the one thing that had been real all along. I called Tyler that night. I didn't know what else to do. He picked up on the second ring. "Rachel." "He knows," I whispered, my voice raw. "It's over." There was a pause, then a slow inhale. "Are you okay?" "No," my voice broke. "I don't think I am." "Do you want me to come over?" I hesitated, my mind racing. Just hours ago, I had been standing in this very spot, caught between two lives. And now, one of them was gone. I had told myself for months that Tyler was what I wanted, that he made me feel alive in a way Mark never could. But now, standing here in the wreckage of my choices, I wasn't sure what I felt anymore. Did I want Tyler, or did I just not want to be alone? "Rachel," he asked again. I closed my eyes. "I don't know." Silence, then softer, "You do know." I need time," I whispered. "I need to figure out what I actually want." Another pause. "And what if I don't want to wait?" I opened my mouth, but no words came, because I didn't have an answer. I spent the night in an empty house, staring at the ceiling, listening to the echo of Mark's words in my head. "You killed us." And for the first time, I let myself ask the question I had been too afraid to face all along. Had it even been worth it? The morning after, the house felt like a ghost town. Mark hadn't come home. His absence was louder than any fight, heavier than any words we could have thrown at each other. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my untouched coffee, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I should have felt relief. The secret was out. No more hiding, no more sneaking around. But all I felt was the crushing weight of everything I had destroyed. I reached for my phone more times than I could count, my fingers hovering over Tyler's number. But every time I put it down, what was I supposed to say? "It's over, I chose you." Because I wasn't sure I had. Mark finally texted that afternoon. The message was short, sharp, and to the point. "Mark, I'll be by later to get my things. Be gone when I get there." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. There was no anger in his words, just finality. A decision had been made. There was no coming back from this. I grabbed my keys and left the house before he arrived. I didn't know where else to go, so I ended up at Tyler. He opened the door immediately, his expression unreadable. "Hey." I stepped inside, wrapping my arms around myself. "It's done." He nodded, studying me carefully. "And?" I sighed, sinking onto his couch. "I don't know." Tyler sat beside me, his fingers brushing against mine. "Rachel, I need to know what this means, for us." I swallowed hard. I thought I did too, but now I don't know anymore. His face hardened. "So you wrecked your marriage for nothing?" "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" His voice was edged with frustration. "I waited for you, I let you figure things out, and now you're telling me you do know." I looked away. I never thought it would feel like this, I thought. "You thought it would be exciting, that it would fix whatever was broken inside you." His tone was cold now, but it didn't, did it? Tears pricked my eyes. "Tyler, please." "I'm not going to be your backup plan, Rachel." He stood up, running a hand through his hair. "If you don't know what you want, then I do, I'm done." The finality in his voice cut deeper than I expected. I had thought losing Mark was the worst thing that could happen. But now, standing here, realizing I had lost everything, I understood what true regret felt like. I drove aimlessly after leaving Tyler's, the weight of my choices pressing down on me. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Mark, the divorce papers will be ready soon. Let me know where to send them." It wasn't unexpected, but the reality of it still hit like a punch to the gut. I pulled over, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had thought I was chasing happiness, passion, something more than the life I had with Mark. But all I had found was emptiness. And I had no one to blame but myself.
Thank you for watching the video. If you want to hear more stories, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Videos are released every day. Good luck to everyone.